There's no wedding, but there were some that were very high end and some that were very low end, and none of them stands out. So just because you want to throw the big party and have it be memorable, I don't remember it. I'm sorry. I don't remember the wedding. The ones that I do remember are the ones where...
So, Bjorn, welcome back to another episode of Life, Money, You, where we talk a lot about life, a little about money, and hopefully you will get some ideas to help you on your journey to financial freedom. I have a question for you. Do you know who always cries at weddings? The cake.
I don't.
They usually have a few tears.
I like that. That's good. That's good. It's painful. Painfully good.
When you gotta stick with the theme, you don't have a lot of choice sometimes.
That's true. That could be on a Laffy Taffy, I think.
Oh, man. What a blast from the past, huh?
I know.
Jeez.
That's where I usually get all my jokes from.
Yeah. Some of those were borderline jokes. It's just like
exactly
not very well thought out thoughts. Yeah. Oh, man. We could do a retro episode for the folks that are listening that are old enough to remember that stuff. In fact, I don't know if you ever had it as a kid, but Big League Chew gum, kind of shredded gum. I saw that in the store and just did a impulse purchase and picked it up and tried some out. And yeah, it's got that old school bazooka gum flavor, man. Takes me back to my childhood.
I still have found the gum that comes in packages of cards, as I've bought those periodically, and the gum is as old as the cards are.
Yeah.
And it's about as hard as each card.
Yeah. I've never had gum shatter in my mouth, but
exactly.
Pretty reliably, the gum that comes with baseball cards.
Yes.
I feel like they're not going for the highest quality gum to begin with, and then you're right, who knows how long it's sitting there baking. It is funny that you would be able to, at any level, put a food product into...
Exactly.
I don't know. We all ate cookie dough as a kid, and we survived. So
regulations aren't as tight for baseball card gum.
It makes you stronger.
Maybe you feel stronger because you can shatter it.
Right.
You feel really strong.
Porcelain-like gum. That's the way to go. So if you didn't know by my dad joke there at the beginning, I wanted to talk to you today about weddings. So something we have in common here. You and I both have had the pleasure of getting married. We have gone through the process of going to a wedding. It's interesting that I wasn't invited to your wedding, though, Bjorn. You know?
Yeah, you're taking me back to a time when we didn't know each other.
It's always excuses with you.
Must have gotten lost in the mail.
Right.
I'm so sorry. You were on list letter E of the alphabet.
I think you should have just started going through the phone book, and I think this guy, we're going to get connected at some point. I actually don't know that much. I've met your lovely wife and your kids and all that. I haven't really talked about that. And so I'm curious what your wedding was like. How did that all come out? Tell me a little story. Give me the picture. Give me the experience of going to your wedding without me going to your wedding and having to pay for it.
Oh, wow. It was a magical day. My wife is from Topeka, Kansas. So we did some might want to call it a destination wedding. I'm not sure everyone felt it was the same kind of destination that you might picture when I say that.
But is a destination, yeah.
We did have a few people travel down from Minnesota. We were living in Minnesota, and we did this down in Kansas where her parents are at. We were married at her church that she grew up in Topeka. And next summer, it'll have been 15 years ago. So you are taking me back. But we had the wedding at, like I said, at the church. And it was interesting because her dad is actually a pastor. And so they had a number of people that came because of that. And so we probably had close to 500 people at our wedding.
Wow.
And I didn't know half of them. A number of folks that were there.
They may not have known you either, Bjorn.
Exactly. In fact, funny story, when I met some of the people that were there, a number of them said, "Now, Bjorn, were you born in Sweden?" And because they hadn't met Bjorn before, and I was from somewhere else, and I was like, "Do I sound Swedish to you?" But maybe with the Minnesota accent, I had a little bit of that.
We're laying it on, right?
I was only speaking in Swedish. It was weird.
The ladies always fall for a man with an accent.
Exactly.
So. Yes, foreigners.
Yes, she liked it. We had our wedding there. I was going to say this till later, but this is another funny part of the day. And this is a little wedding hack tip for you if anyone that gets married in the future. We had so many people come to the wedding that we actually decided to have a little bit of a break between the ceremony and the reception to try to make our food go further, if you catch my drift, and encourage a few people who maybe were on the fence about coming to the dinner to maybe go somewhere else for dinner because we didn't have enough food for that many people. It was a funny choice. So after the ceremony, we went and did a bunch of pictures for, at least an hour, and had even some other downtime. And then we actually did our reception at another local event center in the downtown area. So it was very nice. It wasn't overly produced. We didn't go super, super high end, but we did have a nice buffet. We had live music. I'm a big jazz music fan. So we actually had a live jazz group, which was awesome. I really love that. And then probably the favorite thing we did was we did Cold Stone ice cream cake for our wedding cake, which was fantastic. I got to have one bite of it the entire night. That's how busy we were. And that's the only thing I regret is that we really didn't eat much. We just had people constantly coming up to talk to us, which was fun, but we were starving after the ceremony. So I always tell people, make sure you eat. This is usually pretty good food, so make sure you're taking care of yourself.
If only you had a little time between the wedding and the reception where you could have gotten a little something. Gotten a little nosh to tie yourself over. But next time. You
could have taken the limo through a drive-through. That would have been fun.
So, lots of people. So, how does this happen? I mean, that's a bigger number. I'm probably going to ask you some questions later, and I'm going to tell you that you only ask questions in discussions where the number is so high, no one's going to guess it. But then when people are asked a question like that, you assume it's so high that it's unfathomable, so you guess high, and then the impact of the question is lost. But I would never have guessed 500. Even a couple hundred people at a wedding or 300 people at a wedding is a big wedding. 500 people is a huge wedding. How does one even begin to feed that many people?
Honestly, I'm not even sure we planned on all those people coming to that ceremony, but it was hard to not have the invite open just because of her parents had been there for so long and have such great friendships. And yeah, it was a huge group, but we could only do so much on the reception side. We just had to pick a number. I don't even recall what number we aimed for, but with a buffet, that does help because you can kind of make the food go a little further, I think, than if you're doing everything plated. And it's not as expensive just because of all the extra service and cleaning that has to happen and people. And I'm always amazed when I've been to weddings where even if it's like a couple hundred people and they have all of the dinners coming out at the same time. And I just think that is incredible that this food is all still hot, just all in this back kitchen somewhere. There's got to be a trick to that. I've never been back there, but that's incredible to me. So the buffet really helped and it worked out. I didn't hear of anyone that didn't get food, and we had plenty of cake and it worked out great. Yeah, exactly. Almost enough cake. Exactly. We did have some leftover cakes because we had the big one and then we had a bunch of small ones for different flavors. And we're big ice cream lovers here. That was fun. And we were able to keep some of those and then future trips down there to visit. Every time we had Cold Stone ice cream cake. So it was kind of nice.
Cold Stone is great. If you don't have it near you, I would definitely check it out. We've got one down the street. I try not to go there too often these days. But how about the finances of the wedding? Did you guys plan for it for a while? Do some saving?
Yeah. So we were married right out of college. And so because of that, Emily, my wife, had actually been working for a year. So we did have a little bit of money that we had saved up. And I think we covered a couple pieces of it, but I hadn't worked really at all. I graduated from college, started my first job, and got married all in the same month.
Wow.
So it was a pretty big change right out of college, and I didn't have much. So thankfully, her parents had saved some money for it, and so they paid for most of it. I'm assuming that the venue cost was low or non-existent because of the church connection, her dad being a pastor, but definitely for the reception, they paid for most of it. And what I didn't say yet is that my parents actually threw another reception for us up in Minnesota. And so that's another way you can do an out-of-town wedding. It was basically many of their friends and kids and people I grew up with and all these other folks that we couldn't expect to drive 8 hours down to Kansas. So they took care of that one. And I think Emily's parents mostly took care of the one in Kansas. So that was very nice. I think if we would have gotten married a little bit later, we probably would have paid more of it just because we would have had some more money available. But because I was a new grad and we were barely getting by at that point, thankfully we had some help. So I think you do need to set those targets on different categories. And I've even heard of people who have in each sort of main wedding category, food, dessert, drinks, if you're going to do that, music, you just set a dollar amount for each of those so that everybody knows what they're willing to do and there aren't major surprises as you get into it. Because the hard part is if you think it's going to be in this ballpark and then you actually go and price it out, or you get far enough down the path and then it's double that price, then it gets tricky because at that point, you're not sure you have enough time maybe to execute on it. And good to go into it with a little bit of a plan of what you're willing to spend.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because there's so many elements to a wedding. And I was actually looking at some of the average prices for weddings and the breakdown. Photographer, the wedding gifts, the party favors, the tablecloths, tip, all of these things. If you let any of those start to creep because you put a number there and now instead of 300, if we just go to 350, you start doing that over 30 or 40 categories that go into a wedding, all of a sudden the wedding costs can certainly balloon out of control.
Thankfully, we had a lot of help. I think we even did a number of homemade type things. So like we bought the pieces of the invitations and we worked on those and put those together, and the centerpieces for the tables. We bought the materials and put those together. We had a lot of labor hours help, if you will, from people too. And that was another great way to keep the cost a little bit lower. So I think it was really nice. We didn't feel the need for this to be the one big special event of our lives, like in that sense where it's a big party and this is the only time we're ever going to do this. So let's go big or go home. It was to us more about getting married than it was about having the big party. So I think it really depends for people on how they're viewing that day. Is this your desire to give back and throw this big party and have it be memorable? Is it to have an event that meets the needs but is really about you getting married? Some people don't want the party. They just want to get married at the courthouse. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. And I felt like this was a good right in the middle, really fun, lots of special things, but we didn't go overboard. We didn't do the drone video. I don't even think drones were invented at that point. So
you would have had an actual helicopter with a guy with a huge shoulder camcorder on it, just blowing everything around. Yeah, that would have been interesting. That would have been memorable footage too. The other question here, and this is maybe the most important one, did you get any dessert on the second reception?
Oh, good question. We did. I just remembered. This is how long ago it's been, my friend. I'm like, what did we do? So we had a really nice...
you remember that wedding all the time. You reflect on it like every day.
Exactly.
Something that you just...
I think about it. It's every other day. So this is the off day. I didn't think about it today. So we did a candy bar at our reception up in the Twin Cities. And so again, another decent way to not have it be super expensive is to do bags of candy. And so we got some different kinds of candy that we like, and it's the buffet idea in the dessert camp, if you will, and people just can get a few things that they want, and it was really fun. We did that. We definitely had a little bit of a higher end dinner would be the best way to say it, because we did all like individual, like we did it all plated, and I was actually at a golf course that I had worked at. So I was actually able to get a little bit of a discount on the venue because of my relationship. And I actually wasn't working there at the time. So it was actually just like a favor they did for me because I had worked there, which was really sweet. So that helped the whole equation. And we had walleye for dinner. So that was really good.
Oh, yeah. That's a special treat. Surf. Yeah. So, now reflecting on it, and you're spending every other day thinking about this magical day for you. Anything that you would have done differently? Anything that you wish you could redo?
Yeah, more time to eat cake. That would have been one thing. I am really glad we got to do live music at both of them. We had a jazz group at both receptions, so that was really fun. I think maybe just a little more time to talk to different people that had come. What's hard is that if you're doing like a reception line, and it's a big group. I don't remember how many we had at the one in Minnesota, but we probably had 200 to 300 people at that one. So it was another huge group of people. And it's just, people are just coming in and all you can say is hi and thanks. And then it's like moving on to the next person. So it was a little hard to be in the moment, a little bit hard to appreciate it because you're on the whole time and you're running off adrenaline a little bit and then you're getting tired. So I don't know if it would be best to do it there or maybe having some time. I'm just thinking of all the family that flew in. I had tons of people that came in from California and different states, all these places, and maybe just some time surrounding it where it could be more casual. So it's probably not going to happen right at the reception, but like after it or the next morning or before, just some hangout time. And we had a little bit of that when we were in Kansas, but I think that's probably the only thing that I would want to do a little different. But it was really great. It was totally us. I feel like it was nice. It wasn't extremely fancy. It wasn't extremely expensive, but it was like really nice and memorable and got to do some special things we wouldn't get to do. And yeah, can't believe it's been this many years too. It's crazy.
Yeah. And your candy buffet probably didn't have very stale, hard bubblegum, which was probably
it was all fresh. Exactly. Right. It was fresh.
Didn't let people enjoy the nostalgia of baseball card bubblegum. I totally agree with you. I have a lot of, I wouldn't say regrets about my wedding. I think it was a kind of a traditional wedding. It's what I think a lot of people expect and anticipate when they go and are invited to a wedding. But I think as you get older, you realize how hard it is with life going on to get together. And I wish I had taken more time. So one of the things that I'll throw out here is that my wife and I left the next morning after our wedding for our honeymoon. And I wish we hadn't done that. Because now you have people in town, and I guess, especially when you're younger, you think that there are going to be more opportunities to get together. And now I realize it is really hard to see people. They start having families, they move to different parts of the country. Yeah. You just don't have those opportunities. And at a wedding, this may be sometimes the last opportunity for family and friends to get together in groups. So I wish that we had just postponed the honeymoon, honestly, a few days and taken that time for whoever was going to stay around in town and get some time to catch up, because as you said, the wedding just is a blur. You go through it. It's one person after another. You're doing the glad handing, and it's not really reconnecting, I think, at that deep level that you want to. But if you could grab a meal, a breakfast the next morning with people, the lunch, go golfing, grab dinner, go golfing, some dessert, and then golf. I think those are all great opportunities to reconnect with people. And I'm glad that you don't have any regrets, because I have also talked to people who say, geez, I wish we hadn't put so much money in the wedding. I wish we had been able to buy a place, use that as a down payment. I wish we hadn't taken on debt. So, in fact, I was going to talk to you today because I thought we might just throw out some thoughts now being wedding veterans here. But I'm going to start with some numbers here. I looked them up. Oh,
gosh. I'm scared. I'm scared to hear what these are going to be.
The average cost of a Chicago wedding is, any guesses?
Ooh, $37,000.
$60,800.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Chicagoist Magazine's latest survey on that. But, you scoff at that, but then I thought Minneapolis is no rural town. Average cost of a wedding in Minneapolis in 2021 was $31,700. That's according to Wedding Report, which actually, to me, in 2021, things still might have been a little slow. Maybe people not going out as much as other times. So think about that.
Wow.
And then the average cost of a wedding in 2020, just across the country, and I thought this number was interesting, and they broke it down. So this is where I started to see some interesting things that COVID did. The average cost of a wedding in 2020 was $19,000. However, that was down $10,000 from the year prior. Wow. So, people were trying to do things a little smaller, maybe not gathering people, maybe not doing the destinations that they would like to, but still, the average cost of a wedding being $19,000, or I wouldn't be surprised to see that recovering back to $28,000, $29,000 again this year. Weddings are very expensive. And actually, we were talking a few days ago about a friend of mine who threw a very expensive wedding, but now that I look up the numbers, I don't think they were way off the mark of what the weddings costed. But there are all sorts of issues with this to me. And one of the big ones that I wanted to bring up here was that, I'll have to find it here, but the average couple puts a little over $11,000 of that wedding on a credit card. So they may be getting money from other places, probably some savings, maybe some family contributions, whatever it might be. But in the end, a lot of people are incurring a fairly significant amount of debt. And that is just the wedding. So we have things that aren't part of the wedding, rehearsal dinners, certainly things like the honeymoon and traveling if you choose to do any of that. But I think that these numbers are pretty interesting. And while we're here sniffing at the fall, what I've also realized is that weddings aren't as seasonal as I used to think they were, maybe just in the summer. I know a lot of weddings going on right now. So I thought this would be a good time to break this down. And for people that are getting married for the first time, and I'll tell you what, I was probably in this camp too. You think it's going to be the one time that you've got this opportunity to throw a big party. You want to do it right. You want to have the wedding that you've always dreamed of. For my wife, she had some images of a wedding that she wanted to have. So you want to be able to fulfill some of those things. But I think both of us have talked about this, that we would have done things pretty differently. And it's not that I think the experience would have been any worse, but I also wanted to go to the extreme end here and maybe talk about some very cheap weddings. I think you and I have both attended some weddings that were done on the cheap, and maybe talk about what we experienced, what we thought of it, what we remember from it, and the lessons that you might take from it to do a cheap wedding of your own. Because I think in many cases, it's 80-20 rule that a lot of people can have 80% of the experience that an expensive wedding will give you, but not pay nearly as much. So I'm just curious, have you ever been to a cheap, we have not talked about this. This is not a setup here. Have you ever gone to a cheap, very grassroots, a very budget wedding? And what was that like?
Yeah, I have a number of friends who have done that style. And maybe just quickly before I answer that, it just got me thinking, as people are even just planning a wedding, they've gotten engaged or thinking about it, I can honestly say, if I reflect back over the last 15 years, basically, of going to weddings, and definitely more front-loaded on that side. We haven't been to very many weddings lately. But if I just think back, let's just say the first 10 years that we were married, we probably had 5 to 8 weddings a year we went to. It was crazy. None of them stands out to me. There's no wedding. And they've gone, and I think if I really think hard, there were some that were very high end and some that were very low end, and none of them stands out. So just because you want to throw the big party and have it be memorable, I don't remember it. I'm sorry. I don't remember the wedding. The ones that I do remember are the ones where people said really meaningful things about the couple. And that is free. Like I can just picture a few different moments where it was a really great best man speech, or the dad said something really sweet about his daughter, or they were close family. And so it was just fun to see your cousins, who are these young little punks, get married. And they weren't punks, but they were getting married. And so it was just, it didn't matter really to the guest, to me at least. It might matter to other people, but I'm just trying to think, okay, I've probably been to 40 or 50 weddings, and I don't remember the ones where they spent double or triple as much as the other ones. I wouldn't even be able to tell you who did what. So that, I think, is a very important distinction, that it can be very meaningful and not break the bank. So now to get to your question.
But before,
unless you wanted to respond.
I totally agree with you. However, I think there's an exception to that, and that is the save the date cards and the invitations that you received. Some of those have really stuck in your mind over the years. Some of those very expensive, right?
Oh, I have them all under my pillow. Right. Yeah. And I think about those on the off days, like it's every other day for that.
That's the one that always stuns me, because my wife and her friend worked on our wedding invitations, but I have worked with so many people and friends, and when my sister got married and all that, they are sweating the save the date cards and how big and what kind of stationery should they be on, and can we get a little pearlescent finish to them and all these things. And I cannot tell you, other than even vaguely my own wedding invitation, what anyone's save the date notification, anyone's wedding invitation, and yet those things can be very expensive. As you mentioned a little earlier, being able to throw in your own manpower to do that, I don't think people really care. And to be honest, most people are just taking it for the information. And I'll throw out this hack. The last wedding that I went to, the invitations were online. So I can't remember if it was Postmates or Evite or whatever it was. They were nicer. It wasn't like a cartoon cat saying, come to my wedding or anything like that. But that's how they wanted it because they could track real time who was coming and they didn't have to postage and designing a wedding invitation. So I just remember my wife and her friend and other friends of mine spending lots of time on that. And I cannot tell you a single thing about any of those. So I think a lot of that is going to be lost on people, especially when you think it might be important. So yes, to your point, back to the cheap weddings that you experienced and the great toasts and the great comments. Please continue.
Yeah. We've been to, I'm thinking of a wedding where they had the ceremony at like a kind of like a nature area at a local park. And so it was a nice day outside, beautiful flowers. And I can't imagine that was super expensive of a venue. Now, you've got usually people are doing more and more the ceremony and the reception at the same place. So that's probably one way to either save or just to make it easier for people. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about different locations. We've done that. We had a couple that we knew right at a college that got married at a church, but it was like way out of the cities. And so it was in this small town in Minnesota. So again, I'm going to guess that renting the church in rural Minnesota was a lot cheaper than getting one of the nice churches in the Twin Cities. Just another way that they did that. I think they did the reception at the location, either downstairs or maybe outside. I can't remember. It was a little while ago. I went to Ohio for a wedding where the couple rented it was either their families or somebody they knew's just nice property. And so they just put up a big tent, but they had the reception there and you just pulled into the driveway and it was all right there and they catered in. And so again, if you don't have to pay for the location, then you're just paying for the food. And so I think the nice way to think about it is it doesn't mean you have to go less on everything, but if you take out a couple of costs that are substantial, that brings it all down and that can make it an affordable wedding. So that's probably a little bit of what we did in our wedding was, sure, we could have had plated meals for everybody, or we could have had more Cold Stone cakes, but we decided to
one more.
Exactly. One more would have been nice. And a private room for eating without anybody bothering us. But I think if you cut back on some things, just like in regular budgeting, you can cut back on just a few things. It doesn't have to be everything. And it can really then make it feel like it's a lot less because in the end, it comes down to the total dollars spent on the entire thing.
And then reallocate that to where you really want it. People really want that wedding video and you want to hire a videographer. You want the photographer that you want because you really want those memories captured in photos, whatever it is. Or maybe you want your favorite cover band to perform. So I think that's the key is that you don't have to squish every line item in the wedding, just the ones that don't produce a lot of value. I'll tell you a story if you've got a minute here. Bjorn?
Oh, I do.
It's your podcast. But,
tell the story.
My family was together recently. My parents were in town with my cousin and a couple other my cousins and their kids, and we were all having dinner, and we were just talking about weddings. And it was funny because we all were talking with my cousin Rebecca about her wedding, and all of us agreed that it was the one big memorable wedding that we all really enjoyed. Most of us said it was our favorite wedding. The funny thing about it is Rebecca went into some detail. We knew it was inexpensive, but then she was giving us the specifics of how they got it so inexpensive. So obviously a venue is usually an expensive place, but my uncle and his daughter and their family grew up on a farm, and it's not a huge farm, but they do have a barn on it and 20 or 30 acres of woodland and a big open field. And they had the wedding and the reception there, big tents. So big kind of carnival tents, the banquet tents, and the barn was open. And it's funny because now these rustic chic weddings are all in style, but you could have probably just squatted on someone's farmland and gotten that experience too. And they would have been happy to do that. But so one, the venue isn't going to cost you a lot of money, right? So they did that and they can bring in a dance floor and they can put that on the grass too in a flat area and all that. So you have the basics of what you need. I actually emceed that wedding. And the thing that dawned on me when you were talking about having good, meaningful stories and toasts and anecdotes is that I realized when you were saying that, I knew everyone at that wedding, right? Every cousin, everyone that was getting married. And so anytime I was introducing someone, I could speak specifically to them. When you have a hired hand, and sometimes it's the lead singer for the wedding party, they're just following a script. And even when people were coming out of their seat to come up and take the microphone to do their part, I was telling stories about my cousin Tony growing up with him and his fiance, and just stories as we were filling the time. And I really enjoyed that. It was a really great honor for me to be asked to do that. But like you said, I think it helps make it more personable. And I think that people got some value out of it too. And it was a cheap way to do it because I didn't get paid. The invoice is coming soon, Rebecca.
So having a professional MC in your family, that's what you're saying you need to have.
Or me, or quite the opposite.
The free MC.
But the one thing they did on the food side was they actually hired a culinary school to come and do a barbecue. So it was like a buffet barbecue, but because it was all students, they actually paid just cost of food and then some sort of tribute to the culinary school because the students were getting credit for their class, and they did a great job grilling steaks.
That is genius. Fantastic. I love that. That's such a great idea. Wow. I've never heard of that.
I know we have culinary schools around here. I've never thought about that. I've never reached out to them. These are people in school to study these things, and your standard fare is easy for them. They did a fantastic job. In fact, I remember calling them out at the very end to say what school they were from, and everyone gave them a standing ovation because they were wonderful people, all young people. And so I think they enjoyed that too. The other thing is, instead of a wedding cake, they made cupcakes. So they had a big table of cupcakes. They had different flavors of cupcake, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, red velvet, all that stuff. So people could take what they wanted, and they didn't have to then buy a big cake. A wedding cake can cost a lot of money, for sure, just in and of itself. And then obviously drinking and dancing, but then towards the back of the open field, they had set up a bonfire for the evening. So it's a big bonfire. Nice. The wood was stacked probably 5 feet tall, and then they had a lot of chairs all around there, some Adirondack chairs and chairs where people could go sit. There was actually a table stacked with blankets too. As the evening got a little cooler, people could sit there, and then there was wine there as well, so people could sit around the bonfire. And it was just nice because you didn't have to go anywhere. You knew you weren't getting kicked out at 11 o'clock. And especially for the people that wanted to stick around a little longer, take advantage of the time to see family, we could stay. And I don't know what time we left. It certainly wasn't the wee hours of the morning or anything, but you just never felt pressured that there was some sort of timetable that people were cleaning up that you had to get going.
Yeah.
We all just enjoyed it because it really felt like a party. You say you want to throw a party, you have an experience, and then so many times everyone wants things just the right way that you don't feel like you're enjoying yourself. You feel like you're trapped, that you're behaving in something that's maybe overly formal to really sink into and enjoy. So that was just a great one. We talked about that, and Rebecca shared kind of all those details, and I thought it was just a brilliant way to go, and the experience was fantastic for people.
Wow. Yeah, when I hear you say that, when I think of what a party is, I think obviously different people have different definitions of that, but you're really trying to create an environment to have meaningful experiences together. And that doesn't have to just be the best food, because you can only go so high up on food. I still can't remember any meal I've ever had at a wedding. It doesn't stick with you. It sticks with you in other ways. But it just having that chance to hear stories or connect with a relative that you haven't seen in years, or have the longest conversation you've ever had with your cousin because you live in different places, or just there's all these things that are so unique to that setting, and you want to create environments, which just sounds like what they did. They had the bonfire, they had the dance floor, they probably had seating area somewhere, and because it was all on family property, it wasn't like, okay, clock is ticking night and we're out of here. So that's really great.
Yeah, you're right. When I'm trying to throw a party or having people over, it's really focused on the experience for those people. And I think weddings can sometimes drift from that, and people can still have a good time, but like you said, I've been to so many weddings, and especially when you're in that season of life where you're getting married and your friends are getting married and you are going to weddings all the time, and sometimes you're having to pick and choose because weekends are double booked. I think the ones you want to go to because they're fun are the ones you will remember and enjoy and appreciate and probably talk about for a very long time. So that's the key, is the experience. And sometimes when we look at, is the venue going to make it? Is the food going to make it? Like you said, it doesn't matter. I know expensive meals at some weddings, and I know they have been burgers at another wedding, and that has no correlation between that and my experience of the wedding. Yeah, I have tapped a keg at a wedding to open the bar, and that was a fantastic wedding too. So I think the idea here is that there are things that you need to throw an event or have a wedding. But if you can turn it all inside out and just rethink it, and also divorce the idea that the price of something equals the value of it, I think you will be in for a much greater experience. And in fact, another friend of mine, what I would say is that they rethought the wedding. A lot of people will say, hey, you got to get married in this beautiful place. You got to get married in a chapel or the courthouse or at a location other than the reception itself. And they booked a brewery. Actually, it was Revolution Brewery down here in Chicago. It's a great brewery. They make all sorts of fine beers that you can go and taste. But upstairs, the second level is just a big open banquet room. And so what they did there was they had the wedding up there, and then the staff quickly flipped it over to the reception area, and then they had a buffet dinner. And the nice thing is then you have 70 beers on tap, too, for the people that might enjoy that. I think having it at a place like that, which might have been thought of as maybe atraditional, is another way to go, and just keeps people from having to transit and go to other places and the inconvenience of that, especially when you're going downtown already and you're paying to park for one time. You don't want to necessarily go somewhere else and pay again and have to transit in Chicago traffic or something like that. I really appreciate when people don't get hung up on the way it's been done has to be the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost as you're thinking about making a plan for the wedding, I'm sure you went through this too. You're trying to think of the list of people that are going to be coming. And oh my gosh, that was the hardest part of the whole thing, actually, was who's on the A list. I think we had a B list and a C list. But you could do the same thing with the wedding expenses. You could just look at what are the A things, the things we are really important to us, we want to have, and maybe you set a cap on how much you're willing to spend, but you invest heavily in those things because those are of value and whatever that is for you. And then you do the same thing, B list, C list. And then as you start to price it out and add it up, and there's the unknowns of how hard, easy is it to get? Who do you have to get? What are they charging for different things? What time of the world is it? Is it during COVID, not COVID? Those all can be impacted. But that way you're focused on that first grouping. And you're doing the same thing already with the lists, likely. So that wouldn't be a bad way to go. It's sizing that or putting more things toward the things that are more valuable.
Yeah, you get me thinking there. Does going the traditional way of having a plated dinner actually force you into having more of those lists? Because if you actually go a traditional with a barbecue station and a buffet and it's food that you can easily be flexible with, add some more at the last minute if you need to, the week of the wedding, buy twice as many burgers. Does that actually give you the freedom to have more people, to have the invite list that you want, as opposed to always whittling it down? If you've got 100 plates that you can have at your wedding, that you're always trying to get that magical number, right?
Yeah.
And in and out and in and out. And actually going maybe more casual is going to give you the freedom to invite whoever you want.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You're pigeonholing yourself potentially if you're choosing a certain route, not just financially, but also just numbers wise and just how it has to be done. It's like a per head cost. And if you have to think like that, that can add up pretty quickly versus being able to spread it out like a buffet or like a station. Or I think actually I remember the wedding we were in Ohio, they had a food truck actually that came to the property. So that was fun.
Oh, that'd
just
be
sort of pulled up and then you walk and get your food and come back, and a fun take on a buffet. So
yeah,
that was great.
And as I think of my cousin's wedding, they just had a massive steaks there. So they always kept them on the grill. You could go up and get food at your leisure, which was really nice. I have a question for you. A lot of people are against doing a buffet because it's a little lowbrow. You want to sit down and have a wedding and a reception where everything is plated and it's very formal and it's prepared for you. What do you prefer, plated or buffet?
Ooh, man, that is a good question.
This might be our ground versus whole bean coffee moment for this episode.
I think I like buffet over plated. I like being able to get the portions that you want of different food items, whereas if it's plated, it's just being given to you the same as everybody else, and you have no control over that. So if it's the same food in both cases, and I'm going through, I don't know, I like mashed potatoes. So maybe I want to have an extra scoop of mashed potatoes and a little bit less salad, or Maybe I want more salad and I want less green beans or whatever it is. You're not so sure about that. So you're like, definitely more green beans.
I'll take a salad with a side of hamburger, hold the salad.
Exactly. So I like the flexibility, I guess, that comes with that. And it is fun at weddings, if it's good food, to be able to go back for another round. So if there is food available, that's a little bit easier to do that with a buffet versus just getting your one plate. Now, I don't remember a wedding I've been to where it wasn't enough food. So in either case, if you're a growing boy and you need to have more than one steak, maybe the buffet is nice. So I say buffet.
That's a good one. And I'm glad you took that side, because if I had to defend buffet, I'd say the exact same things. You get to bias the items a little more towards where you. If I were someone who didn't like asparagus and they always put asparagus on the plated meal, I wouldn't eat it. And I would have wished that I got a little bit more of those scalloped potatoes or those steamed carrots or whatever it might be. Yes, I probably would have said the same thing if I had to defend buffet. But I am going to have to defend the plated meal here. What is important to remember about plated meals is that everyone is exactly the same. They all have the exact same taste and the exact same calorie needs. And so if you get salmon, just remember 100% of people love salmon. They want it exactly the same way. And there's really no individuality between anyone. And the nice thing is, if they really do love it, you want to keep them wanting for it, not to be able to go and satisfy that appetite for an extra scoop of potatoes or a little bit more of the green beans or whatever. Yeah, that's my defense of the...
I think the winner is obvious in this conversation.
Yes. Oh, I love the freedom of the buffet. You can take what you want, skip what you don't. And like I said, if they've got a lot of extra of something that was just delicious, it would be rude not to go back up and get some more. Those people worked very hard to prepare that.
So I've got a question for you. Have you ever been to a wedding where the dessert is already on the table and there's like chocolate and vanilla or strawberry and chocolate, or there's two flavors, but they go every other and they set them out at the places? What are your thoughts on that?
It becomes a black market of sorts. Everyone starts evaluating. And this is where, again, you got to defend the plated, because everyone is exactly the same. So you just want to give everyone chocolate because... Yes, I have seen that. I've even seen where, like, the party favors are little bags of chocolates, and they're mixed up. And now you've got people horse trading for, I don't like the Hershey's Kisses, but I love Reese's. So
dark chocolate all the way. Oh, I want milk. I want milk chocolate. Yes. Oh, white chocolate for me.
Oh, you got the cracker. I don't eat the almonds. Oh, coconut. So again, it's a great question, Bjorn. I've seen it a million times. I've seen people switch it. I've been at weddings with my parents, and I don't want to ask some stranger, do you want that one? So I'll go to my parents' table and be like, hey, Ma, would you mind switching? So, again, aren't we just leaning in here to let the attendees choose? Give them the freedom of choice. Go buffet. And, I think it ends up being cheaper. I think generally it gives them what they want, and it tends to be a way to get the cost down a little bit here.
But I think saying all of this, like I said, I've been to a number of weddings. I don't think I've ever felt slighted at a wedding. You know what I mean? Like when you're a guest and you're getting a dinner provided like that and whatever it is, I think most people lean just grateful for whatever. But if you have the choice, if you're the one that's planning it, just know that the reality is we want the buffet. The guests want the buffet.
I'm just speaking on behalf of everyone, even
exactly,
even the formal people who like their crab cakes slightly toast on the outside. We like the buffet. Give us the buffet. Free the people. I want to ask you about friends participating in weddings or picking up the slack or doing some of the roles here at Little Cheaper. Have you ever been at a wedding where you've been asked to participate as opposed to just standing like in the wedding party or something like that? Have you ever folded up chairs or made centerpieces or anything?
I don't know if you know this, but I am a trumpet player, and so I have been asked to play trumpet at a few weddings.
You can buy Bjorn's CD in the link in the description below.
Exactly. You Are My Sunshine is the only song that's on there. It's on trumpet, too. I have played. I have usually been paid for playing. I haven't always expected it because it's usually been asked for by friends or family who know me well. I've done a few weddings where I didn't really know anybody, but it's mostly been in the fold. So that's one example personally that I've done. I think Yeah, for sure. Like in our wedding, we enlisted help of people. Like we had ushers as one of our roles. And so that is a nice way to give more people a role in the wedding. They have to do usually a little more work than some of the other people are just standing up in front. They're walking people to locations. They're helping do whatever happens. They're being more operations focused, that sort of thing. We've taken advantage of that. I feel like as a family member, like when it's been cousins or others, I just have been willing to offer help, even though I haven't even been in the wedding or part of the wedding party. I feel like it's easier in that sense to just step up and help carry stuff over to the table, make sure that picking up trash that's fallen on the ground, just little things that are helping the bride and groom, helping it still be a special day so that they don't have to think about it. So I think there's definitely something to that. And of course, in our wedding, we had a lot of help preparing the invitations, preparing the programs, preparing the centerpieces, all of that. And we didn't pay anybody for that. They just were willing to help. So that's a great way to share the cost, especially if you're going to have a bigger wedding and you have everything is times 200 or 250. It takes a long time and the bride and groom are busy enough. And so it's really nice if you can get that extra help. How about you? Did you guys enlist that, or have you been enlisted at all?
Oh, and when you said usher, I had a flashback there because I have been an usher in more weddings than I care to remember. And an usher is not just an usher. They are basically a flash to the open spot freelancer for just about everything. Give the strong, burly guys with a lot of stamina the title of usher. Absolutely. And I wouldn't be shy about asking for help because I think the people that are close to you, family, friends, whatever, I think they want to help. And if you can pay them, fantastic. If you can throw them a little something, show them some appreciation. I think showing them the appreciation is more important than the money in many
totally.
In many ways.
Or like a special gift or something, some meaningful gift that's sort of special to that day. But even that, I've gotten so many gifts from weddings and I don't use any of them. Oh, I'm sorry. I do use one, and that is a coffee mug that I got at a wedding. That is one thing that I do use, but everything else is sitting in a drawer somewhere, I think. So it's very nice to get those. Only a few things have actually come in handy over time.
And for those that don't know, Bjorn grinds his whole coffee beans for that coffee mug. Yeah, I have been involved in a lot of stuff. And the one that I really remember, and I didn't expect it. So I was in a wedding, and what I didn't realize is that the venue was a very nice building. It was a high ceiling, wood floor. It was in a rural area, but it was a big room. And we got there, and I was part of the wedding party, and we got to the reception hall, and the tables were out, and everything was looking beautiful. Tablecloths, centerpieces, everything. We had a wonderful reception. What I didn't realize is that the family of the bride and groom and the brothers and sisters, and they had a pretty large family, had set that all up that morning of. So they had come, set up the table, set up the chairs, laid everything out. They had made all the centerpieces because it wasn't until afterwards that people left, the lights came back on, and everyone started breaking stuff down. So obviously I'm there, and so I'm helping. You're just folding up chairs and putting them back. But basically they had booked this hall, and it had everything that they needed, but there wasn't service, which is a great way to have the experience and the facility without having all the manpower costs, which are really the expensive part of it. And many hands make light work. It didn't take us maybe 20 minutes to break everything down. Tablecloths back in boxes, centerpieces, all that. Rolled the tables to the side, chairs back onto the racks, and it was good to go. And I don't know who cleaned it up and swept and all that later, probably the facility. But it was so easy to do, even though I didn't expect it, and even though I was there in a tuxedo, and you're pretty casual by the end of the evening, it wasn't an imposition to do. In fact, you're happy to do it, and because you see everyone just going at it, you just jump in, and like I said, maybe 15, 20 minutes. It did not take long, and then you're back on to the rest of your evening. So I would not be reluctant to do something like that, and it can be any piece of this, right? Photographers are expensive. You might have people who are just passionate about photography and maybe even do photography for events that you don't even know about. I think it's a little easier now in the Facebook world and the Instagram world to know what people's hobbies are, but like you playing Yaz trumpet, or other people who are musicians or entertainers or MCs or whatever it might be, I think you might find that even in your circle of friends, you might have a lot of talent that you can leverage for your event that maybe you didn't even know. Take advantage of it. I think they want to help, and it's a great way to save money.
Did you guys have to have a point person, though, for that? Do you think that's required? Somebody that knows what needs to happen so that when you weren't planning on it, and you could, I'm sure, do a number of the things just by watching what people were doing, but eventually somebody needs to know what all needs to happen?
Great question. So most weddings will have a wedding organizer. Someone will have that kind of title. And for our wedding, it was our friend Carol, and she did it. And you know what? She did it for virtually nothing, a small token of appreciation, attending our wedding and all that. And in many ways, now you've kind of made me feel guilty that I should reach back out to her and her husband and do something.
We got some Life Money U gear for you, Carol. Right. We'll send you a nice little package from Life Money U.
You did a fantastic job. I think it was pretty straightforward, but then you do have someone just making it easier on the rest of us. Just the one thing I can remember, she leaves the ceremony a little early to go out and meet the limousine driver to make sure he's in the right spot. It's just those little details.
Yep, the transitions.
You don't think about, but when you have someone taking care of it, everything runs smoothly, right? Someone who's the phone number that people call, or it's on the back of the program, or whatever it is. Absolutely. And again, someone who's just organized, they're pretty planned, work under structure, I think can really do that job. But again, it did not cost us the cost of a wedding organizer. You can actually hire professional wedding organizers, and they are very expensive. They could be $15,000 on top of the cost of the wedding. So,
yeah, great to have, for sure. Just even looking, like you said, in your local network or family or friends on different roles. You reminded me that my wife gave me a HD video camera for our wedding. That was her gift to me. And so we actually asked my uncle to just go around and just videotape parts of the ceremony. We didn't pay a videographer. We just had him go around and ask people questions like, hey, what do you want to say to the bride and groom? And it was really fun. It's really fun now to look back on that. We probably need like a VHS player to watch it, but we were able to see different people and cousins that are little guys, they're adults. And that was a great way to go. And we've actually recommended that to other people. Just stand a camera up on a tripod. At least you want to capture it, because we've had a lot of friends who that's one of the first things they'll cut. They don't want to pay the videographer. It's expensive. They want the pictures. But we just so valued having that tape to be able to watch, because you miss all the interaction and just the feeling of the moment if you just have pictures. And then as time goes on, you forget what it was like a little bit. And so that video is precious, like, to us. We love watching it, and it wasn't anything special. It was just somebody walking around, and I think he had a fun time doing it too. So that, just per your point of, it wasn't like he's a videographer. Anybody can handle a video camera and go around and ask people questions. So it's a great way to go.
And in that respect, and we've been doing this podcast and we do some other things on social media, I think sometimes when you hire the professional, you get a lot of stylized production value. A lot of music, beautiful transitions, good lighting, all these things. But when you have just an amateur doing it, you get a lot of content value. They're not worried about how it's framed or the golden rules of thirds or whatever it is and the right lighting. They're just getting people's candid thoughts, people on camera. And so in some ways, I think the content there could be far more meaningful than the same amount or the same length of content from a professional that might be very beautiful, but is cutting out a lot of stuff because you don't get this kind of raw content from the professional. So I think that's another way to go. That's a great tip. You have 4 girls who will presumably maybe find weddings of their own in the future. If you were to give advice to people looking at weddings, getting into that mode, planning for it, thinking about it, maybe actually getting ready to tie the knot, what would you say to people? What would be a piece of advice that Bjorn would give to someone going through it?
Yeah. If you have 4 daughters, you're going to want to set aside some money right now for the future, because we need that money to grow to a large number in order to be able to afford
dating starts at 45.
Well. Exactly. And they won't be getting married for 35 more years. That's step number 1. I would also say, you had said earlier that the average couple puts $11,000 on a credit card. And I can see that if you think that you're going to use some of the money that you might get at a wedding to pay it right off. But what a bummer to get money at a wedding that you're just using to pay your wedding off. What a bummer. Like, you can't use that to have a nicer honeymoon or to put on a down payment for your first house or whatever it is. So I would just encourage people to be realistic about what you can afford. Just because you think it should be the biggest party of your life and the nicest party of your life doesn't mean you should do that. And I hope that today we've debunked the fact that it has to be like that, because we were both just sharing stories of our most memorable weddings we've been to, and it could have been in a bare room. And as long as the right people are there and the stories are funny and memorable, that is a memorable wedding. It doesn't even matter what kind of buffet it is. It just has to be a buffet. So I would say, think about really what you can afford. I like the list idea of just the A, B, C items. What do you really value? What do you think really needs to be there? And then you can get really creative. Weddings are so common, and people, I think, often think, oh gosh, that's a big expense. That's the first thing that comes into most people's minds. It's wedding, big expense. There are so many creative ways to do a wedding, so many. And with information sharing and now people being able to capture those moments and put them on YouTube or other places, there's just so many ways you can learn that by yourself and even just ask your circles of friends and family that have been to different weddings to really think hard about different areas. Like we talked about, like maybe you just have a photographer, not a videographer. Maybe you do this all at the same venue. Maybe you go to a non-traditional venue. Maybe you go to a farm. Maybe you do a food truck and not a plated dinner. Maybe you have a professional MC in the family that does it. So there's all these different options for each category. And I think just giving yourself the ability to feel flexible there can really keep it more reasonable. And then we've talked a lot about cost here, but you don't have to totally skimp on it either. It should be a special thing. And that's where I think saving ahead of time can be super helpful, because then you're just freed up to be able to spend that and be really excited to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice. And the one I'll throw out there is I'm going to actually steal one of yours from earlier in this conversation, because there's a lot of ways I would weigh in on this. But I think if you are going to be a part of the wedding, think about the toast and the speech that you're going to give. I've heard so many that I think are thrown together, or someone thinks they're going to wing it, and they are painful to listen to. I don't remember anything of it other than it was excruciating as a listener. And I don't think it takes humor to really give a good speech. And if you're not a funny person like this guy, I would try to avoid it, because sometimes bad jokes
joke all day.
are just bad.
Joke all day.
Right. Sometimes they're just bad. So what I would do is kind of lean into whatever your strength is. So if it is telling a story that is really meaningful, I would do that. If you've got a few minutes to tell a story that showcases what the people that you want to highlight for your audiences, I think that's a great way to do it. It doesn't have to be long. It can be short. What I would rather have is an example for some of the people who haven't had all the experiences that the people in the wedding party haven't had, to get an idea of what these people are like when we don't get to see them. So a story about how they're generous, or a story about how they were a brother or a sister to you, how they were beyond friend and a family member to you, whatever it might be. I think those are the important, and spend a little time on it, because I think it's better to read a story off a script that is meaningful and impactful and gets the message across than just winging it. And especially when sometimes you get a little lubricated with the beverages at the wedding, things can start to fall apart. They sound better in your head than they will on camera. So having that written down can be a lifesaver too. I've done it many times. So that would be my suggestion, is invest a little bit there, because I think, like you said, it's those small things that we remember, and I think really can make an event. That's my advice. But I want to thank you again, Bjorn, for sharing your advice, wisdom, and your experiences of getting married and opening up to everyone here on the channel listening to this. But if you are thinking about it, hopefully you have gotten some life and money tips from today's conversation to go out and have the wedding of your dreams without breaking the bank. So until next time, we'll see you later.
See you later, everyone.